A razor-thin Senate map, a brewing political civil war, and a trillion-dollar legislative fast pass are about to collide in the 2026 midterms.
Yeah, it's a massive collision course.
It really is. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are tearing into a huge stack of sources for you. We've got internal strategy memos, we have raw economic data,
Yeah.
and even real-time betting markets.
Right, because we want to see what's actually driving the 2026 battle for the U.S. Senate.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
hey, a very quick warning before we jump into all of this. These memos contain highly partisan, politically charged material, like from both sides of the aisle.
Definitely.
So we need to be clear, we do not take sides. We are not endorsing any of the viewpoints we're discussing today.
Yep.
We are simply putting the raw facts on the table so you can see the forces at play, impartially.
That is the whole mission today. We want to, strip away the political spin and just look directly at the math and the mechanisms that are forcing these politicians to make these moves.
Right, so let's hit the raw numbers fast. We're going to do a quick 90-second news hook here because the Senate math sets the stage for everything.
It really does.
So right now, Republicans hold a 53 to 47 majority in the Senate.
Yeah.
But heading into the 2026 elections, the map looks absolutely brutal for Democrats. And it's not for the reason you might think.
No, the math is actually wild here.
Right, because Republicans only have to defend 22 seats, Democrats have to defend 13. So think of it like sports, right? Or maybe the board game Risk.
Oh, risk is a great way to look at it.
Right, because Republicans are stretched incredibly thin. They're playing defense across the entire field, trying to hold 22 different territories.
Yeah, they have massive exposure. They're defending vulnerable seats in Maine and North Carolina. Plus, they have open seats in Michigan and Iowa.
While the Democrats just get to hunker down and protect a much smaller, concentrated zone of 13 fortresses. Logically, the team stretched across the whole board faces a way harder battle.
They do. But, and here's the twist, when you look at the betting markets, that raw map advantage suddenly stops mattering.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, look at Polymarket. Traders there have pushed over $1.3 million in volume into this exact question. And right now, those traders give the Democrats a 52% edge to win control.
Wait, really? They give Democrats the edge, even though Republicans are defending way more territory.
Yeah, it comes down to historical gravity, basically. Midterm elections almost always punish the party in the White House.
Right.
And currently, that's the GOP under Donald Trump. So even though his approval ratings are actually sitting around 47%.
It is high for him, right?
Yeah, it's the highest of his two terms. But history tells us voters just naturally push back against the party in power during a midterm. That historical penalty pulls the betting markets toward a flip, totally defying the math of the map.
Okay, so Republicans have this massive map advantage, but they are fighting an historical curse. So what actually breaks the tie here? Like, what drives you, the voter, to actually go to the polls?
Well, it's the economy. It's almost always the economy. The February 2025 economic statistics tell a very specific story about why voters are frustrated.
Let's hear the numbers.
So the economy added 151,000 jobs in February.
Which sounds good, but economists expected 170,000, right? So they missed it.
They
right?
missed it by a lot. And on top of that, the unemployment rate crept up to 4.1%.
Okay.
Which matters because unemployment stayed below 4% for 27 straight months before this recent creep up. And if you look at consumer sentiment, the country is totally fractured. Republicans sit at a confident 83.9 on the index.
Makes sense. Their party's in power.
Right. But independents dropped down to 57.2 and Democrats plunged to 41.4.
Wow, that's a huge gap.
It is. But the most alarming number for the GOP involves inflation expectations. Consumers expect inflation to hit 4.9% over the next year.
Wait. 4.9?
Yeah, that's the highest level since November 2022.
Okay, I have to pause you on that because I'm looking at the data, and the actual consumer price index, the CPI, only hit 2.8% in February.
Right, it's actually relatively low.
Yeah. I mean, it's down from January.
Yeah.
Core inflation is at its lowest since, April 2021. So if baseline inflation is only 2.8%, why do voters expect it to shoot up to nearly 5%? Are they just, misinformed?
No, not at all. It comes down to the difference between baseline inflation and compounding costs.
Okay, explain that difference.
So when the government says the CPI dropped to 2.8%, it just means prices are growing slightly slower than they did last month.
Right. It doesn't mean prices are actually dropping.
Exactly. When you go to the grocery store today, it does not matter to you that the inflation rate technically slowed down.
Because the bill is still huge.
Right. Your eggs, your milk, your rent, they all cost vastly more than they did 3 or 4 years ago. The costs compound.
So it's like, even if your speedometer drops from 80 miles an hour down to 20 miles an hour, the car is still moving forward.
Yes, great analogy.
You're still getting further and further away from where you started.
You still pay that higher price at the register. The financial pain compounds every single week. And when people feel that daily pressure, they just naturally expect things to get worse.
Which tanks their sentiment.
Exactly. And that compounding pain drives their choices at the ballot box.
Okay, so put yourself in the shoes of the Republican Party. You control the White House, the Senate, and the House.
Right.
You see voters are furious about the economy. How do you fix the budget before November without making your base angry? Well, you reach for the legislative fast pass.
Ah, yes. Budget reconciliation.
Right, reconciliation. I love this concept because in the Senate, you usually have to wait in this massive line called the filibuster, right? You need 60 votes to pass most laws.
Which is really hard to get.
Almost impossible these days.
Yep.
But reconciliation is like the theme park fast pass. It lets the majority party skip that 60-vote line completely. You just need a simple majority of 51 votes.
It is the ultimate cheat code in the Senate. But it comes with really intense restrictions. You can't just use the fast pass for anything you want.
Right. There are rules about what rides you can go on.
Exactly. There's this mechanism called the Byrd Rule, B-Y-R-D, and it strictly limits what you can do. The Byrd Rule dictates that you can only use reconciliation on laws that directly change federal spending, revenues, or the debt limit.
So it has to be about money.
Strictly about the money. You cannot pass sweeping cultural legislation or, like, standard regulatory laws. It has to change the actual dollars and cents of the budget.
Okay, so what exactly do Republicans want to push through this fast pass right now?
Well, two things. Massive cuts and massive tax extensions. The House Budget Resolution actually instructs the Energy and Commerce Committee to cut $880 billion.
Wait, $880 billion. With a B.
With a B.
Finding almost $1 trillion in a single committee seems, that seems mathematically brutal.
It forces some incredibly brutal choices. To find that kind of cash, the strategy memos indicate they're likely going to target the Medicaid expansion populations.
Oh, from the Affordable Care Act.
Right. The ACA expanded Medicaid to cover millions of more people. And to cut $880 billion, they'll likely have to establish what are called per capita caps.
Okay, stop right there, because per capita caps sounds like pure Washington jargon.
It totally is.
How does that actually work for, a patient or a state?
Okay, so right now, the federal government basically splits the actual healthcare bill with the states. If a patient needs expensive care, Washington pays a percentage of that total cost, whatever it ends up being.
So they share the risk.
Exactly. But a per capita cap completely changes the deal. Under a cap, Washington just hands the state a flat, fixed amount of cash per person.
Ah, I see.
Yeah. So if a patient's care costs more than that fixed amount, Washington just steps back. They're done.
Leaving the state holding the bag.
Right. The state either has to pay the difference out of your own pocket or they have to cut the patient's services.
Wow. So Washington caps their own risk and pushes all the financial burden down to the states. That is how you save $880 billion.
Yeah, that's the math.
But here is the friction. While they try to cut spending over there, they also want to extend the massive tax cuts from a few years ago, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
And this is where the GOP is facing intense internal division. They have a massive fight brewing over how to calculate the costs of extending those tax cuts.
Because tax cuts cost money, right?
Right.
They reduce revenue.
Right. And Senate leaders want to use this math trick called current policy scoring.
Okay, explain how this trick works, because the memos talk about this a lot.
So standard scoring assumes that a temporary tax cut expires on its official end date. If you vote to renew it, you have to add trillions of dollars to the national deficit on paper.
Because you're losing all that future revenue.
Exactly. But current policy scoring it basically pretends the tax cut lives forever.
Wait, what?
Yeah. By pretending it never expires, extending it magically costs $0 new dollars on paper.
So you just cook the books, they make $1 trillion tax cut look completely free.
That is the strategy the Senate leaders prefer, yeah. But House leaders and conservative members like Representative Chip Roy are actively fighting it.
Right. Roy had some strong words about this.
He publicly calls that strategy Fairy dust.
Fairy dust.
Yeah. He demands the party account for the actual cost and offset it with real cuts. So the GOP is walking this really tightrope. They want to cut spending to balance the books, but they desperately need to keep voters happy heading into a difficult midterm.
And cutting Medicaid while fighting over fairy dust tax math, that creates some heavy political vulnerability.
Huge vulnerability.
Which brings us to how the Democrats plan to attack. Because while Republicans wrestle with these budget cuts, Democrats see a golden opportunity here.
Oh, absolutely. They want to weaponize that exact compounding voter anxiety we were talking about earlier.
The grocery store pain.
Exactly. They've developed a highly specific messaging strategy to do it. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer actually came out and declared that the high cost of living is the #1 issue for all of 2026.
He specifically calls out healthcare, housing, childcare, and goods affected by tariffs. Like he wants to talk exclusively about your wallet.
Right. He is relentlessly focusing the party on domestic financial pressure. But to make it work, Schumer is aggressively contrasting this domestic focus with Donald Trump's foreign policy.
The military stuff.
Yeah. Schumer accuses the Trump administration of focusing on overseas military adventurism. He specifically points to recent actions and proposed involvement in Venezuela.
So the argument is basically Republicans are spending American treasure abroad while completely ignoring the brutal prices you pay at home.
That's the exact message.
You know, it's fascinating because this completely flips the traditional script.
How so?
Well, if you look at political history, focusing heavily on wallet issues, the economy, balancing the checkbook at home that usually serves as the Republican playbook.
Oh, right.
Right. Democrats usually focus on broader social safety nets and global diplomacy. But here, Democrats are just straight up borrowing the old GOP playbook. They're painting the administration as distracted by foreign conflicts.
It's a deliberate and honestly desperate pivot. The Democrats know they need to rebuild trust with
A single
working-class
vote in the
voters.
U.S. Senate can freeze the most powerful government on
Many
earth.
of these voters feel
But right now,
completely
a
ignored
political
by the political
standoff
establishment.
threatens to
They
blow
hurt
up the rules
every
forever.
single time
Yeah,
they
we are
buy
watching
groceries.
the fundamental machinery
So by
of American
hammering
lawmaking
affordability
just
and rejecting
grind
foreign
to an
intervention,
absolute halt.
Democrats
And honestly,
hope
the
to win
physical
back
toll
the
on the
exact
people inside
voters
that
who
building
abandoned
is
them
about to
in
become very
2024.
real.
Focus
Right,
on the
so
wallet,
let's set the scene.
point out the
It's
opponent's
March
distractions.
2026.
I mean, on paper,
Picture
it
the
sounds like a
hallways of
very
the United
solid
States
plan.
Capitol
And
right
it does.
Aides are literally dragging
There's a
military
massive
style
crack in the
cots
Democratic
into
playbook.
back offices.
They have the message,
Oh,
sure,
yeah.
but
Staffers
they
are
tearing
stockpiling energy
themselves
drinks by
apart
the
over the
case.
messengers.
Exactly.
Yeah,
We're looking
this
at
is
a
where it gets
scenario where
messy. The
senators
party
might
is suffering
actively
from a totally
refuse to drink
fractured
water
electoral
just
strategy.
so they don't have to leave
They
the floor
cannot
to use the
agree on
restroom.
who
Which
should
is
actually
wild,
deliver
and
this
it's all because
economic
the Senate
message.
is
It's basically
completely
sparked a political
deadlocked
civil
over
war
the
inside
Save
the
It America
Democratic Party.
Act.
Right, that
The
big
strategy
election
memos
overhaul
describe
bill.
it
Yeah.
as
It's centered around measures
establishment
like
versus
voter ID
non-establishment
requirements.
proxy war.
Democrats are
The
aggressively
Democratic
blocking
base
this
is just
legislation,
incredibly
and
frustrated right
Republicans
now.
desperately
First, they
want
lost the
passage.
presidential race
But they
with Kamala
lack the
Harris in
60 votes
2024.
required to
Right.
break the stalemate.
And then,
in March
Which means
2025,
frustrations are
Chuck
just
Schumer voted
boiling
with
over.
Republicans to end
Today,
the government
you have
shutdown.
28 Republican
shutdown
senators,
vote.
people
That
like
vote
Pete
lit a
Ricketts and
match
Cynthia
under the
Lummis,
progressive base.
demanding
The
that the
grassroots
Senate
voters
force
felt
a
like Schumer
grueling,
just
physical,
surrendered.
talking filibuster.
They
They
felt
want
he
to
didn't
force
push back
Democrats
nearly
to
hard
stand
enough
on the
against
floor
Trump
and
agenda.
talk
And
until
now
their
there's
vocal
actual
cords just
fallout
give
from
out.
that.
And if that
Sitting
fails,
Democratic
they want to
senators
break the
are
standing rules of
actively
the Senate
rebelling against
entirely
Schumer's
to
chosen
force a
candidates
final
for
vote.
2026.
And the real shocker
Let's
dropped
look at the
just a few
specific
days ago.
primary battles
Senator
because the
John
details
Cornyn,
here are just
a man who
fascinating.
fiercely
Yeah, let's start
defended
with
the
Maine.
old Senate
It's a
rules for his
crucial
entire
toss-up
career,
race.
Right.
just
So
published
in
this
Maine, Chuck
fiery
Schumer and the
op-ed.
establishment are
saying
backing
Republicans
Governor
must
Janet
act now
Mills.
to get this
She's
bill
a
passed.
two-term,
Yeah, he said they
moderate,
had to deal
very
a fatal
traditional,
blow to
very
the rules,
polished politician.
which instantly
classic
triggered a massive
establishment
public
pick.
call out from
Exactly.
former Senator Joe
But
Manchin.
progressive senators like
Manchin
Bernie
slammed
Sanders and
Cornyn
Elizabeth
online
Warren
for,
are endorsing
well,
a guy
massive
named Graham
flip-flop.
Plattner.
Because the rules of the
Tell
Senate
me
are
about Plattner,
quite
because
literally
this is
hanging by a
wild.
thread right now.
Okay,
I
so
mean, the
Plattner
decisions made in
represents
the
the
next few days
absolute
will
opposite
dictate
of
how American
polished.
laws
He's
are
a
written for the
veteran,
next century.
and he's an oyster farmer.
Welcome to this deep dive.
Yes.
Today,
He's running
we have
this
a custom
fierce
mission
insurgent
tailored just for
campaign.
you.
He literally
We're
pulls
going to
traps out
explore
of the
the
water instead of wearing a
swashbuckling,
suit.
pirate-filled
He's even
origins
facing
of the
media
filibuster.
scrutiny
It
over
is
a
a crazy
controversial
history.
tattoo.
It really is.
Right.
But he's
We'll also
building
break down the
incredible
terrifying
momentum
parliamentary
precisely
weapon known as the
because he
nuclear
channels that
option.
anti-establishment
And finally,
energy.
we will unpack
Working
a
class voters
mind-bending
look at an
mathematical
oyster farmer
concept
and they see someone who
called the
actually
Manchin
understands those
paradox.
compounding
which
costs.
proves exactly why politicians
real
use
person.
gridlock
as a
And
highly
then you look at
calculated
Michigan,
mathematical
another huge
strategy.
open
So,
Senate seat.
By the end
The
of this
primary
conversation,
there
you will
features
hold
State
the
Senator
secret
Mallory
decoder ring
McMorrow
Yeah,
for the
and she did
chaos
something
you
you
see
almost
on the
never
news.
see.
You will understand the hidden game theory and stated that if Democrats win the majority, she will not support Chuck Schumer as a leader.
I mean, think
Before
about
we can
that.
truly
You almost
grasp
never
the
see a
physical
candidate
threats
openly
and the
threaten the
massive
current
stakes
leader's job
of this
before they even win
2026
their own
MTV America
primary.
Act breaks all the traditional rules of party loyalty.
We really need to look at
Completely
what the
breaks them,
filibuster
and the chaos
actually
is
happening
And more
in
importantly, how it
Minnesota, too.
started.
You have the establishment
Because it
pick,
wasn't designed this way by the
Representative
founders,
Angie
right?
Craig.
Like,
She's
this
facing
wasn't in
off
the
against a
blueprint.
Not at all.
progressive
If you read the
candidate,
U.S.
Lieutenant Governor
Constitution, you
Peggy
will not find the
Flanagan.
word filibuster
Okay,
anywhere
so
in the
when I
text.
see all these
Wow,
primaries,
nowhere.
Maine,
The
Michigan,
Constitution
Minnesota,
basically gives the Senate the authority to
I
set
have
its
to
own
ask,
internal rules.
is this
So
just
back in
the standard
1789, during the
progressive
very first
versus
sessions,
moderate
debates
fight we see
ended with
every
just a
single
simple
election
majority
cycle?
vote. You mean
Okay,
just
so
regular
51 votes
factionalism?
and you're done. Yeah.
Exactly.
Parties
But
always
there
have
was this
wings that
massive
bicker
loophole.
over ideology,
They
right?
never
Is this actually
codified a
any
specific
different?
procedure
It
to
looks like
force a
standard
vote to happen
factionalism on the
if someone
surface,
simply
sure.
refused to
But
stop
strategist
talking.
Nan
Ah.
Whaley points out
So
something
without a
much
mechanism to
deeper in
cut
these
off
memos.
debate,
She explains that the
politicians figured
base
out they could
currently
just,
lacks
you know,
trust
hold
in
the
the
floor
entire
hostage.
business
They
as
did.
usual
We actually have
establishment
diaries from the
playbook.
very
Trust
first
being the
session
key
of the
word.
Senate.
Yes. This goes
Pennsylvania Senator
way
William
beyond
McClay
standard
wrote down in
ideology.
sheer
When
frustration
sitting
that
senators
senators from
endorse a
Virginia were
tattooed oyster
intentionally
farmer
talking
over a
away the
two-term
clock.
governor,
Just to
that
make sure a
serves as a
specific
direct,
bill couldn't
glaring
pass.
rebuke of
Right.
Chuck Schumer's
They literally
leadership.
weaponized the clock.
So, like,
I mean, if
Senator
they were holding the
Martin Heinrich was
legislative
saying in one
process
of the memos,
hostage,
the
it makes perfect
business
sense
as
why the
usual
press eventually
calculation
started calling
just
them pirates.
no longer meets the moment. Which
Exactly.
brings us to the
base
actual
thinks the
word
old, polite way of running
filibuster.
elections
Yeah, it's
completely
easily
fails
one of
in
the
the current
strangest
climate.
words in
The
American
grassroots
politics.
voters
So
are
where does
sending
it come from?
really loud,
The
aggressive
etymology
feedback.
is
They want
fascinating,
fighters.
honestly.
They
the
want
term
fierce
really
fighters.
took hold in
They
the
want people
1850s.
who are willing
It comes
to
from the Dutch
challenge
word
the status quo
rebuiter
and tear
and
down
the
the old
Spanish
systems,
word
even if it
filibustero,
means tearing
which
the
translates
Democratic
directly to
Party
freebooter
apart in
or
the short
pirate,
term
right?
to do
Yes.
Wow.
Specifically,
let's step back and
the
summarize this
mercenaries
entire
and
storm.
pirates who
Because there are
raided
so many
Caribbean
moving parts
islands
here.
and Latin
It's a lot
American
to take in.
countries
We
during
look at the
that
2026
era.
so they were calling these
Yeah.
distinguished
And we see
senators
a pirates.
brutal
Pretty
Senate
much.
map for the
The
Democrats.
term entered the
We see
political lexicon
undeniable
because
economic
observers
pressures, with
recognized the
voters just
behavior.
furious about the compounding
Senators who
costs of
talked
everyday
for
life,
hours
even if the
were
official
literally
inflation rate
hijacking
slows
the
down.
Senate floor.
Right.
We
Like
see
taking the
sweeping
government
Republican
hostage,
plans
just like a
to
pirate
cut
taking over a ship.
$880 billion from the
So
budget.
let's track how the
targeting
Senate tried
healthcare
to
with
fight
those
off
per
these
capita caps
legislative pirates
while fighting internally
because as the country
over
grew,
fairy dust
I mean, you
tax
couldn't
math.
just have
And
one
on the other
person shut
side-
down
On
the
the other
entire
side,
government for
we
weeks
see a
on end.
Democratic
No,
Party
you
that is
couldn't.
finally
But it took a
zeroed in on
long
the
time
cost
to
of
build a
living,
defense. By
that
the
is fighting
early
itself
20th
just as
century,
hard
these
as it fights
marathon
the
speeches
opposition.
became
So when you look at your own
catastrophic
ballot
for a
in
modernizing
2026,
I can
nation. Or,
imagine.
you know,
So
when
finally,
you see
in
the
1917,
endless political ads on your
President Woodrow
television,
Wilson pushed
remember
the
what
Senate
we
to
unpacked
adopt
today.
Rule 22.
Yeah, those ads aren't random.
This
No,
rule created
those
a
names
formal
and those
process called
messages
cloture.
do not appear
Cloture,
by
okay.
accident.
They are
Which is
actively
simply a
being
mechanism to
shaped
force
right
an
now
end
by
to
these
debate.
intense,
But here's
behind
the
the
catch.
scenes
It
fractures
required a
by the complex
massive
budget
two-thirds
math
majority vote
and by
to
the
trigger.
very
Two-thirds,
real
wow. Which is an
economic
incredibly
pain points
steep
you
hill to
feel at the
climb.
grocery store.
So
It
stiff
fundamentally
that over the
changes
next
how you
4
read
decades,
the political
the Senate
headlines
only
once you see
managed
the
to
machinery
successfully
underneath.
invoke
It really
cloture
does.
5
I want to leave you with a
times.
final thought to mull over.
That is wild.
We talked
Yeah.
early on about
Southern
how the betting
senators
markets
famously
give
used this
Democrats a
exact tool to
52%
block
edge
civil rights
to win the
legislation for
Senate.
years.
Right, despite the
The
map.
gridlock
They
grew
hold
so
that
intense
edge
that in
despite a terrible map and
1975,
despite a
the
massive
Senate lowered
chaotic
that
civil
threshold
war
from 2/3
inside
down to
their own
60
ranks.
out of the
So,
100
Is
total
the old
senators.
political rule of party
okay.
unity
And that
dead?
60-vote
That's a great
threshold is
question.
the number
Pundits
that
always say a
dominates our
divided
politics
party
today.
loses.
Exactly.
Right.
But here's
could
where I
this
think a lot of
primary
people get
chaos
confused.
actually be a
When we hear the
messy,
word
necessary
filibuster,
process?
we don't
like
just think of
maybe
a
fighting
60-vote
aggressively
math
in
problem.
public is the
We
only way a
picture
political
Jimmy
party
Stewart
actually
and
finds
Mr.
candidates
Smith goes to
who
Washington.
genuinely
Right, a
resonate
classic
with a
movie
deeply
scene.
angry
Yeah.
electorate.
We
It
picture a
definitely
single
challenges all
person
the
standing
core
at a
assumptions
podium,
of how
reading a
modern
phone book,
elections work.
sweating, refusing to sit down.
Well, thank you so much for
But
joining
senators
us on
rarely
this
do
deep
that
dive.
anymore. Why don't they
Keep
have to
questioning
physically
the
talk
headlines,
today?
keep digging
That
into the
is
raw
a
data,
crucial piece
and
of the
we will see you
puzzle.
next time.
So